Let me start by saying that back in the days, the government made a very important step, fully implemented a roadmap and established Moscow International Financial Center. And today, largely to this forum that was part of the roadmap, we can say that it's a truly international forum because we have representatives of various international centers. And today we're going to talk about how to optimize mechanisms of public procurement. My name is Alexander Kalinin. I'm president of All Russian Public Organization of SMEs called Opora Россия. Before I introduce my speakers, I would like to make a brief opening remark. The national project to support entrepreneurial activity contains rather ambitious goals. 32.5% GDP should be generated by SMEs by 2024 instead of the current 22.3%. Is that a lot or not? It is. Supposed to make quite a breakthrough. By the way, our Chinese colleagues have attained a more ambitious goal of 60%. What it is we would like to highlight. If we genuinely want to change the structure of our economy, that would mean, in the first place, that share of procurement accounted for by SMEs should be comparable to the share of GDP they generate. This is part of the strategy for the development of SMEs. And if we talk about public procurement in particular, we'll see that we're witnessing good progress according to the data of Federal Anti-Monopoly Service. The share of SMEs has grown from 15.4 in 2017 to 29.7 in 2018. There's more entrepreneurs, SMEs, that say that the competition is fair and just according to Magram, Promsvesbank and the RSBI index that we've been measuring for 4 years, every quarter. The share of SMEs that say that procurement done fair and fair competition has grown up to 42% from 30% in just 4 years. Although there's another trend. Some businessmen complain that there's a very large share of single vendor procurement, collateral that's required is too high, technical requirements are getting more and more complicated, and so are procurement-related documents. By the way, public procurers also complain about it. There's more and more affiliation factor in public procurement. There's high competition between small businesses and large businesses. And our panelists today are very interesting from the point of view that they are people that contributed a lot to the improvement of the public procurement system. They were personally engaged in this progress. Let me introduce Anton Gette, project coordinator, All Russian National Front for Fair Procurement, Gennady Degtyarev, head of the Moscow City Competition Policy Department, Mikhail Yevraev, deputy head of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, Anna Katamadze, deputy head of the Federal Treasury, Alexei Lavrov, deputy minister of finance of the Russian Federation, Maxim Rochmistrov, auditor, accounts chamber of the Russian Federation. Dear panelists, time limit is 7 minutes. You can speak from the seats or go up to the rostrum. And after that, we'll give the floor to our experts that sit in the first row, and I will introduce them a little later. I would like to start by giving the floor to Mr. Rochmistrov. I want to hear from the accounts chamber. What has changed in the past 5 years since President tasked you to monitor public procurement system? You've accumulated a lot of experience, you do a great analysis, so over to you. Before I begin covering the current situation, which is not always a clear blue sky, let me say that recently I visited together with Anna, the US, with the government delegation, who were speaking about how they do monitoring of public procurement. And after we gave an overview of how the system works in Russia, they commented saying that for us, what you do is not planned, it's fantastic. And commenting on our plans, they said it's beyond anything they can imagine. So we might be critical about our public procurement system, but still, it remains one of the most advanced in the world. But we should not rest on the laurel. And back to the point raised by our moderator 5 years ago, indeed, we were tasked by the President to monitor not just Federal Law number 44, which regulates public procurement, but also Law 223, which is quasi-public sector. And the President said, for the business community, for the society, both cover public procurement, because they are regulated by the state, they're done by the state. So for the past 5 years, we've been analyzing the situation. And I hope one day both systems would become part of the single framework public regulation. Because sometimes we're told these companies are making money. Well, the state established those companies, and the state is not about making profit on the domestic market. So if a company belongs to a state, if it's run by a state, it should not set its priority as making profit at the expense of the population. So I think today we need to set different KPIs for the management of these companies. So if we look at the aggregate volume of the market of public procurement or state-regulated procurement, that would generate about 30% of GDP of the country. So we're talking about a lot of money. If we look at other indicators, there's a national target that was set forth to achieve a breakthrough in the development of the economy. But purchasing power of population should grow for that to happen. Unless people buy goods and services, no one will be producing. So if we want to give a boost to the process, how can we achieve that goal? So we looked at the market, and we've seen that in the past 5 years, the volume of public procurement, the aggregate volume of state-regulated procurement has been growing from year to year, growing much faster than does the economy. It grows at 11, 15, 16%, which is much higher. So through this growth, through this increase in volume, we need to give a boost to the development of the economy. Unfortunately, however, we haven't seen any breakthroughs. If we look at Law 44, the level of competition, and this is one of the main indicators we're looking at. So this has virtually not been changing for the past 4 or 5 years. We receive about 3 applications per bid. If we look at 283, Law 283, there's virtually no competition. There's less than 2 bids per each tender. If we look at the number of potential participants, and the potential volume is 4.5 to 6 million people, but much fewer participate in the actual market. So this does not promote the development of the economy in our country. There are clearly problems we need to deal with, because we're not just auditors, we're also partners. The Ministry of Finance, by the way, has taken into consideration most of our proposals, and I want to thank Anton, members of State Duma, members of the Federation Council, for the attention they've been given to improving this legislation. Problems do remain, quite a few, but the overall trend that persists today is be business-friendly and invite business community to this market, make it priority for most of them. I'm sure that would give a kick to our economy. Now that my presentation is available, and I'm going to show you some statistics. So this is a volume of public and corporate procurement in 6 months. So it's about 30 billion in a year, so we're looking at 6 months. But unfortunately, the bulk of the volume will still be generated in the third and fourth quarters, although, and I think it's quite an achievement, we've achieved this volume in the first 6 months. So as you can see, 223 is way ahead of 44. But both should contribute to the improvement of economic situation in the country. Here you see distribution of procurement depending on various parameters, by price, in percentage points, by year. Here you see competition and efficiency of procurement indicators. As you can see, 1 to 8 is the level of competition of 2 to 3. On Law 44, it stands, well, it's about 3 applications, 3 bids per tender. And we've seen some change in the past 6 months, a very slight increase, although I'm afraid in the upcoming 2 quarters, the level will go down because public agencies will be in a hurry to enter into contracts, and they will speed up procedures for that purpose. There used to be law number 94, which many believe is better than law 44. So we've analyzed the situation. We've seen that in the years 2012, 2013, the last 2 years when it was in effect, the amount of procurement without competition was over 70%. So the law 94 was mostly in the gray area, where most procurement was done without competition after law number 44 was adopted. Well, there was a placebo effect, and it's a large piece of text. No, not everyone was able to read it, so people were fearing the new law, and the level of competition raised immediately significantly. The amount of procurement without competition dropped from 70 to 30%, but as people grew used to it and found ways around this new law, the level started to go up again, and now we're in a situation that's very much comparable to what was happening in 2009, 2010, but we need to break this trend, reverse it, and struggle to achieve greater competition because it's one of the national priorities. However, even today, we see that the situation is still better than federal law number 94 that was in effect previously. Number of failed procurement, we're looking at not just absolute figures, but aggregate figures as well. You can see the dynamic in the 6 months of 2019. So we see a certain improvement as compared to a similar period in the previous year, 2018, but it's not very significant. We don't see any major change in the recent years, so it has been rather stable. So it's the same, but measured by the number of tenders. You're running out of time. So competition, main indicators, very briefly. When we talk about control, what is it we need to improve? What is crossed out is what is absent in the electronic form. But Anna will probably comment on it. At least we understand that by the end of 2019, all of these indicators will be introduced, with the exception of the part that relates to the initial price of a contract. We haven't come to a single position on that, but we're working on it, and probably will introduce automatic control and audit of the entire procurement system that's in the system, it's in the electronic system. And if we take into account volumes, which are significant, and colleagues will talk about it. Without that, it's hard to measure how the system operates. And this cannot be done manually, not any longer. With this, I want to finish my presentation. I'm sure colleagues will have questions. I'd be happy to take them. But to end on a positive note, all of us, all market participants, I mean, all of us that regulate this market of public procurement, we understand that many of the problems we have identified are either being dealt with by State Duma or by our government, and I'm sure that in the next year or two, the system will be transformed, will evolve, and will be able to achieve a breakthrough, because we've been in a stalemate for the past 2 or 3 years, and since members of the State Duma have been paying a lot of attention to the problem lately, I'm sure we will be able to change the situation and make procurement system under Law 44/223 more business-friendly, more business-oriented, make it more convenient for potential suppliers, for potential contractors, and bring more SMEs to this market. I suggest we thank the audit chamber, the accounts chamber, that has done a great job and have accumulated lots of statistics and have done a lot of analysis, which I think is very good. I would like to thank Maxim Stanislavovich and give the floor to Anton Ketta, All Russian National Front for Fair Procurement. Anton was there from the start, and I understand how difficult it is when it's discussed under the auspice of the Russian president. Nonetheless, the project has happened. So how do you think things stand, and where should we move forward? As coordinator of the project and on behalf of our experts, let me comment on how we need to improve the system of public procurement. By the way, I'm also a member of State Duma, and I was elected to State Duma very much thanks to the work I was doing under this project, and I oversee this work in the State Duma, member of the working group headed by Mr. Zhukov. Let me say a few words about the whole Russian public organization of National Front, and then say a few words about the project and suggestions that we introduced and that are currently work in progress. I will try to stick to the time limit and then take questions.
So this is public control over budget spending. So we're supposed to see how funds are spent in different industry and regions. We understand that the money allocated for this initiative upon the presidential decree, so we should pay maximum attention to that, both for the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service and other agencies. So we keep a close track of this project. But public control has also joined in. So in cities, towns, and small settlements, we are trying to see how this initiative is being implemented. So we analyze at which price and quality all these activities are being conducted. And we escalate the issues all the way up to the president if necessary. So at the Sochi Forum, I was also talking about that, saying that some situations are not acceptable. Sometimes the citizens of small settlements or municipalities are supposed to take care of those small projects, but what we see is that it doesn't happen, and the prices go up 20% or more compared to what they could be. So we are looking for transparency and oversight. And we want to understand the project structure from the very beginning and not when the project is completed. We want all the information to be transparent and available to the public. So this public control has been successful. 13,000 volunteers work on this project. We interact with public organizations with NGOs. So we are a platform for everyone who wants to be involved, who wants to take care of his or her municipality, town, city, or country as a whole. So those people who care about the places where they live, they are invited to this platform. Опора Россия has always been part of that. We've been in partnership with this organization, and at big fora, we can hear that entrepreneurs can apply to the honest procurement website without even applying to the federal anti-monopoly system, saying that the procedures in place are not clear enough or clean enough. So without escalating to the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, we can change the specification of the contract, of the competition, to make it more transparent and appropriate. So all entrepreneurs and the public are invited. As far as other changes are concerned, the State Duma has a work force keeping track of the situation. So this is a consolidation of different companies, experts, trying to see what changes we need in the public procurement system in Federal Law 44. Maxim gave us very good numbers that in Law 94, it stipulated more competitive processes. This is true, but what we need is to ensure good access of the public to the public procurement process. So we want to simplify the processes, and for even small vendors to easily understand the system and be able to participate in the bidding process. So small vendors like head of kindergarten is supposed to understand it, must understand it, and easily take part in the procurement process. So all those funny videos that we see in the end of the year, for instance, road construction under snow, are not acceptable. This is what happens in the end of the year when funds have not been used properly. So our goal is to simplify the processes and shorten the procedures, make them easy and simple to comply with. Maybe other experts will have something to add. So according to Federal Law 71, we have given the rights to the bidders to reapply or to contest the rules of the bidding, to be able to have quick and short access to the bidding. And also we have decreased the limit of the bidding prices. So we also make sure that the contracts are executed in good faith. But we have received over 200 suggestions from different groups and organizations on how to improve the whole process. So the law has been will be reviewed in the first reading this year, and then should be adopted soon. So hopefully this year we will even have the second reading of the bill. So I think I have used my 7 minutes. So if you are interested in anything I've been talking about, please ask questions. ask me questions, me as a member of the Parliament, of State Duma, and representative of my organization. Thank you. Let us thank our distinguished speaker. Also, recently we received the government award for the contribution done in the area of public procurement. Now I would like to hand over to Mikhail Yevraev, Deputy Head of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service. You are a government regulator in this area. So does your agency see what are the issues and where we're going? Thank you. Let me say a few words. So, about the practices that we apply. Yes, we oversee both 223 and 44 federal laws. We see the number of complaints going up, and up until now we have received as many complaints as we received in the whole of 2018. But we are looking to streamline the process and help entrepreneurs protect their rights. As far as 44FZ is concerned, Federal Law 44, yes, it has been, in my opinion, a step back compared to Federal Law 94. So, yes, indeed, there are more competitive processes and procedures, but now it takes a lot of time for the customer to organize the auction. And now we explain that we have only two procedures or two rounds of bidding. So if nobody has applied in the first and the second round, then we can renew the contract that has been in place before the bidding. So this was the idea. Unilateral termination is also possible now, and many entrepreneurs come to us and say that they made a contract, but the customer is putting claims against the vendor without any grounds. Or, for example, the customer sometimes doesn't have permits for construction, for instance, and the entrepreneur cannot perform the contract, and then makes the vendor to blame for poor performance or lack of performance. So the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service addresses all these issues on the merits of the case. So if we see that an entrepreneur is right, we would not put him on the blacklist. So once we have a competitive procedure, we can say, yes, if you do not comply, the contract can be terminated. Because if we are trying to achieve a competitive environment, we need to oversee to make sure that all requirements are met. Also, there was another step ahead with Federal Law 71. This is what adopted by State Duma together with the government of the Russian Federation, but it's not only about consent for construction or overhaul. It should also refer and relate to all other products involved in those construction contracts. But we moved away from many pages of requirements in construction, but we would like to make the same improvement in other industries. One more issue about electronic platforms. Yes, there is such thing as non-disclosure. Many customers work only with 7 available platforms. I won't give you names, but it's a big issue now. Of course, it's not about investigation. Investigation is good, but useless. We need to outline the number of participants so that there is no chance for disclosure or conflict of interest. If we did not have special accounts, we could simply cancel the first round of the bidding and say that all participants could participate in the online auction. But we do have special accounts, and it takes time to establish interaction between the platforms and the banks. So we're trying to cut the timelines. So in Federal Law 71, we defined that there should be only 4 hours between the bidding and the start of the online auction. Let us reduce this period to 2 hours or 1 hour because we're trying to avoid affiliation and conflict of interest in the bidding process. Also, let me say a few words about violations such as orders for future construction. For instance, for the value of 3 billion rubles, meaning that a future, not yet constructed facility will be procured 6 months from now. So it's not about construction, it's about procurement of an available facility, although the facility is not yet in place. So these are gross violations, not errors. And if this happens, we escalate such cases to the law enforcement agencies. It's not the responsibility of the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service any longer. As far as errors are concerned, yes, there are human errors when a customer or an entrepreneur places some wrongful information or attached an inappropriate bank guarantee, and we have no opportunity to help our participants improve or correct their errors. So, and now we're working to give the opportunity to our participants to correct them mistakes, to reattach the document, to provide an appropriate document. So to be able to correct simple errors. Today it is not possible. No matter whether this error was intentional or unintentional, you cannot correct it, and you are immediately put on the blacklist, and you are not able to take part in the bidding process anymore. What else do we have? Complaints, claims, professional claimers. Yes, we need to charge a fee for unsubstantiated claims. Yes, we do have an idea on how to do it, and we are ready to discuss it. We do not want people to come to us with invoices. If you file a claim with us, and if the claim is not justified, then the company should pay a penalty for it. This fee should be a certain percentage of the potential contract value. It should be painful for people to think before they file a claim. And this is closely related to the fact that we need to develop a uniform data system, because some claims are filed in hard copies, some online. We would like to have the single information system so that all the stakeholders are aware of what is going on and notified, and we want to see all mail exchange between customers and potential vendors. so that we can make decisions without calling people to the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service and make life of our customers and entrepreneurs simple. You have made a very good bridge to the next speaker and next presentation. Yes, but we're looking forward to have electronic shops and stores, so for companies to be able to procure during one day, to procure goods and services. This is a good idea, so we would like to give opportunity to make those procurements within 24 hours. We believe it would be good both for customers and for entrepreneurs, for all of them to understand that public procurement is quick and easy. So there is a lot to do in the future. So the system is still very complex and sophisticated. Well, Federal Law 71 made an attempt to simplify the system, but there are volumes of legislation and regulations. We hope there will be revisions to the law, and the system will be simpler and easier to use. So we thank the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, and we have Anna Katamadze, Deputy Head of the Federal Treasury, will continue. So on the business side, yes, when all the certificates are signed, we see a lot of violations and a lot of complaints at the phase of certificate execution. And it is very easy to be put on the blacklist for the business. So what comments do we have on behalf of the Treasury? Yes, indeed, this is a very relevant matter. We understand it. And in the beginning, let me show you just one slide.
Look, we do this analysis every year. We'll look at what's happening in terms of procurement under Federal Law 44/223 and Law 44. As of the first 6 months of the year, about 3 trillion rubles worth of contracts were published, 72%. The amount is over 2 million, and about 30% in terms of volume of money. These are large contracts. They are not really numerous. They're just 77. So 30% of the economy of public procurement are accounted for by a very small number of contracts that are signed without any competition under decrees of government or tasks given by the president, or there are some failed tenders which result in single vendor. By the end of the year, the ratio will not change, although the amount will grow. If we look at Law 223, the situation is even worse in terms of competition. 1,600, a small number. These are large procurements that are not regulated by either of the two federal laws. Let me very briefly comment on this slide. I agree with everything Mikhail mentioned in his presentation. We need to streamline our procedures, and hopefully we will be able to do that in the package of amendments will be adopted this fall. We're currently working on it, so do colleagues from the Ministry of Finance. There's also a consent-related clause, which was very efficient in terms of construction. So when large bids contain a clause on consent, that had significant impact on the statistics. I don't have any exact data, but it did improve competition and it did result in savings. But Federal Law 44 is rather cumbersome, which regulates everything prior to the procedure, but does not cover anything what happens after the procedure. So it did not have any effect that the business community needs, that those that do procurement need. I'm referring to contract execution and contract payment because most violations relate to those two stages. Because the Treasury not only operates the unified system, but we also do control and monitoring. And unlike Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, we also do follow-up. We don't look at complaints of suppliers, so we're very well familiar with federal agencies that do procurement. So we'll look at how contracts are implemented, and we see that there's no regulation and no statistics whatsoever on what happens after a contract is signed. So let me highlight a few important points, which I think are very relevant and must be dealt with as soon as possible. Acceptance acts, for instance. This is not at all covered by Federal Law 44. There's just one article that says that acceptance act should be signed, but it's not clear should it be complete or partial, what happens if only part of works have been completed, how these are paid for. So it's a huge problem because bona fide contractors fear because it generates risks for them, because if anything goes wrong, they risk not to receive payment at the final stage. Another important problem we're seeing is that there are huge delays in payments on contracts that have been executed. It happens often that after acceptance acts are signed, it takes parties up to 6 months to do settlement, to pay the money. And this is not something you can complain to the Federal Antitrust Service or any service, but you can go to court, but it takes courts up to a year, and you risk fines, you risk to lose bank security, and there are many problems involved. So we need to at least start dealing with it. This also will introduce electronic format of acceptance act, because in the electronic system today we only see information about contracts and it ends there. So we can collect statistics, but that's all. I want to inform businessmen and media that as of June 1st, we launched a pilot project on Electronic Acceptance Act. And together with colleagues from the Federal Tax Service, we agreed that an Electronic Acceptance Act signed in the electronic system is legitimate and legally valid and should be accepted by the tax service. So since we participate in this electronic document flow system, you can sign it basically online. And this has been welcomed by organizations that participate in those electronic formats. So we introduced this novelty as of June 1st, and we welcome everyone to test it in pilot mode. Although it's pilot mode, it will be legitimate, and although Federal Law 44 does not contain specific provisions on those acts, nonetheless, Civil Code allows for this opportunity. So as soon as we introduce these amendments in full, we will be able to see the entire procurement history from the beginning until the end. So we will see whether goods and services were genuinely procured, because naturally we will integrate the system with the books of both those companies that procure and those that provide services. Secondly, it's a very efficient tool to protect a businessman in case there are delays in payment, because you become completely visible to all the supervisory services. So you see that all works have been performed, all payments have been made, and you don't need to try and prove to a supervisory body because they will see everything online very conveniently. Secondly, it has already been mentioned that all claims should be aggregated in a single monitoring system, which will raise transparency, which will facilitate control for auditors, because we'll see exactly what's happening between the parties of a contract. And since there's another problem we need to deal with, one party can invalidate a contract, and at the moment we cannot see how this happens, whether the one party informed the other party, and this can happen for different reasons. For instance, some goods at some point are just no longer produced, and this should not invalidate contract. So this is what we cannot see right now. We need more transparency, and this is what we will be doing. We can fine-tune procurement procedures indefinitely, but we've been working on that for 10 years now, and still little has been done on the final stage, the execution of a contract. Last point I want to make relates to electronic roster. There's legal framework in place. There's Decree of Government 145. There's a norm in relevant federal law. But for some reason, procurement remains separate from the roster. So these two legal structures remain isolated from one another, although the Ministry of Finance has done a great job filling out the roster. If you apply it, the only area in which roster is used are medical substances, and public agencies that do procurement must use roster. And since for other areas it is not mandatory, we cannot compare statistics in the unified electronic system. By the way, I started with the economy for a reason, because if we look at the pricing, how the pricing happens, generally it happens as follows. An agency that wants to procure something, it requests a quotation from a potential contractor and then sets the price at this level. Very often they're criticized for that, and they say, how can I anticipate a price? How can I estimate a price if there's no market? Because most of the market are in construction, in large procurement, but there's no competition. It's really hard to identify whether the price is justified or not. And then after procurement happens, supervisors come, agencies that do monitoring come, and they have lots of complaints about accounting, about bookkeeping, about the pricing. Why? That happens because we are unable to look at the market, to analyze the market, and see how much it actually costs. So we need a roster. We need this roster to be mandatory so that we could accumulate statistics. So if we want to simplify procedure, if we want to diverge from those cumbersome procedures, because we reduce them hard as we can, but it still remains at least a month. But if we look at all the procedures, cost estimates for all the bidding documents, it takes more time than bidding itself, and it's at least a month and a half, 2 months. So I agree with Mikhail. We need to do more procurement through catalogs, from electronic trading platforms, and for that we need to use roster. And my very final point is independent registration body. We've been working on that for a long time, little progress so far. Still, the general situation is that there is a set pool of contractors. There are problems related with inside information. Confidentiality, by the way, is the most important thing when we're talking about tenders. An independent registration agency was set up specifically for that purpose, to deal with all these problems. It operated for a while, but then the procedure changed significantly. The legal framework changed. Federal Law 71 changed. New requirements were introduced, and no one worked on updating the functionality of this independent registration agency. And as of February 1st, we finally will launch a new edition and will connect all electronic platforms to it. And I hope that all of our suppliers, about 250,000, were registered already in this unified roster. By the way, as of February 1st, only the registered ones will be able to participate in tender procedures. And it's not enough to bring a screenshot in case there's a problem, but they could collect, in case there's a violation, they will be able to forward information to this independent agency swiftly, online, and Federal Anti-Monopoly Service will be able to swiftly respond. So these are the major points I wanted to make.
По-моему, вот те планы.
Thank you. Well, I think your plans go beyond the most optimistic dreams of the business community. Well, I hope you're able to stick to the timelines, because without access to the public procurement system, our economy will not be able to develop. So hope you're successful. With this, I want to talk about positive experience of the city of Moscow. More and more Russian regions are using Moscow platform public procurement. The president gave relevant instruction at the meeting of the State Council. So I want to give the floor to Gennady Dokhtov, head of Moscow City Competition Policy Department, to talk about their plans and the progress. Thank you. Good day, colleagues. Electronic procurement is definitely a priority for the economic development. And I was listening to Anna very attentively. Although we work in parallel tracks, I want to highlight that as part of city public procurement, we try to meet all challenges that were highlighted at this meeting. So we'll look at all criteria, justification, price justification, dealing with risks that might impact business at the procurement stage. So we've covered them all. And we try to take into account both what our customers need and how it's technologically covered. So this is a very complex system. We're trying to integrate dozens of systems of city management. So we've created this unified contract system, which is really comprehensive. And you can see very clearly that money has been allocated, that money will be paid. So our priorities are financial control and collateral guidebooks, which are very important, regional systems of public agencies that identify their needs. By the way, we do procurement from energy suppliers electronically, and this is really good. This helped reduce timelines and time frames. It used to be 4 months, and now it's done swiftly. Another important factor is control and monitoring system, which is risk-oriented model by a colleague from the relevant division. So the idea is to prevent problems before they happen. And before any procurement is done, we analyze it. We'll look at the contract terms of reference, at various criteria that can be used by a procuring agency. So they're all unified and they're all streamlined. So it is all part of our city procurement system, and the procuring agency can publish information online in this unified system and interact with various sub-platforms from the beginning to the final stage where the protocol is published. As for the roster, it has been elaborated in great detail to the level that allows to identify proper pricing. If we look at digitalization, we believe, and simplifying procedures, so we've introduced a unified standard for all procurement. Today, we have about 200 types of procurements that have been unified. So there's a typical standard, there's a set of requirements. But to answer Mikhail's question, when someone complains about whether someone complains about those procurements, we have not received any complaints, and the average number of bids is 6 per contract, which is high competition. We no longer require model document number 2, so there are no additional requirements if we talk about service providers. So if we look at statistics, if we look at the number of tenders performed, 50% today in terms of figures and 70% in terms of volume. And once we're done, once we finish this exercise, we'll achieve 90% in number and 70% in terms of figures. So I think that once we achieve unified standard, once we adopt this approach, once we protect our business, we'll simplify procedure, we'll guarantee level rules of the game for all.
As part of the digitalization effort, we have introduced a mobile application at zakupki.gov.ru. This has been a very good story, and we have launched, we would like to launch the electronic signature functionality in the cloud to make it possible for anyone to take part in the bidding process, not just receive information, but take part in the bidding process through his or her tablet or smartphone, and have access to the system without any intermediaries, and as Alexander has said, to feel protected as a business. So, and all costs will also be shown in the system. We have also launched the vendor portal version in English. A few words about the vendor portal. We deliver to the regions the information for a single goal, to help the business have the available infrastructure both for the vendor and the customer to be very efficient. And we have obtained 3 results. Last year we had 18,000 new users, and half of them were vendors. And the regional vendors, they foster competition, and they signed 17,000 new contracts in public procurement, both in the system and in the electronic store, which makes small purchases possible. The second result was good feedback from the regions. The regions now could sign 25% of the contracts with vendors from adjacent regions, and they had not been able to do that before that system was introduced. They could not see those vendors. So it fosters economic relations between the regions and fosters development in general. In the English language version, well, we made we looked at different procurement systems in different countries, and this slide shows that this in the U.S., for instance, they do not have electronic procedures. They do not process small procurements through this portal, but they have a lot of integration with outside systems. So this portal does not provide information to the rest of the world, but only to the dedicated participants. And we have taken all this experience into account as we develop the English language version, and we would like to continue along that path. So in St. Petersburg at the International Economic Forum, we discussed that as well, and we made a contract between the city of Moscow and Opora, Russia, and Delovaya, Russia, because our priority was to involve manufacturers, SMB, which is the most active part of the economy at present. And we want to understand how we can improve the whole system, how can we make it comfortable for them to participate in public procurement, and how can we make the whole system effective and efficient. So we see that subscription. Let us go back to the first slide. Here we have a tool called MOS Robot, and in the right-hand side, upper side. So if you sign up for it, you will receive additional information, and this information will be very focused. It will be related to your area of expertise or to your business, to your industry. So the first revision of Federal Law 71 has given us certain improvements and improved the efficiency of the whole process. So in the second revision, we would like to see our suggestions implemented. So we would like to see electronic commerce, electronic procurement that will raise the barriers and ensure the accessibility of the products available with the vendors to the customers. Thank you. So you made a compliment to the members of State Duma on the one hand, and on the other hand, you encouraged them to adopt the second revision of the law before the year end. Now we would like to ask Alexei Lavrov, Deputy Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation, a strategic agency in financial area, share his considerations. So next year we will celebrate the 15th anniversary of Federal Law 94 in July next year. The Ministry of Finance is a young regulator. We've been involved in this process for a couple of years. We were working on Federal Law 505, but maybe you will have comments on that law, maybe some suggestions for improvement, because we understand that we can further develop this law only relying on the electronic means and tools, electronic public procurement. So, but we have already reformed the process quite well. So the Ministry of Finance completed coordination, interagency coordination on closed procedures. At the same time, the goal of this bill is to eliminate legal uncertainties in 504. So we're now working to improve Federal Law 44. This fall, we will address this bill again. So the second bill, and we have discussed the concept of it at the working session this summer. This will be the autumn bill, which is being prepared now, and in October it will be submitted to the government and to the State Duma for consideration. So most things that have been mentioned by the panelists will be reflected in that bill. But we do have consensus with all the participants of the process, which is a very good sign. And this consensus helped us finalize Law 71. So the goal is to simplify the procurement procedures, to introduce full electronic document flow, introduction of automation of processes, eliminate excessive paperwork, change standards. So the system of standards is not operable yet. It is decentralized, and it gives a free hand to customers, which means there are no standards. There are only general principles and practices that everybody should follow, but those practices are not followed, and so it needs to be streamlined. We will try to get rid of unnecessary statutes. So we have tools to turn statutes into laws, because the critics say there are too many statutes, and it is hard to operate having a lot of such legislature. We consider it very critical. So we'll make sure there are no delays in the procurement process. Well, first of all, such delays need to be diagnosed and then cured. All in all, we do see progress, but most issues that we have are things that precede the procurement process itself and the finalization of the procurement process. It is still unclear what we should do with the budget limits. So everybody is waiting for those limits to be established in February, and then people run out of limits. So it is not clear why customers do this while those limits are assigned for 3 years, not for 1 year. They do have limits for 2020, 2021. Those limits are available. They should be applied. We have a feeling that we have some system failures and understanding between financial bodies, industrial bodies, and customers. They do not interact, and they do not understand each other. Yes, we try to address this issue in the area of road construction, and they agree that we need to streamline long-term contracting, because it makes the whole business easier. So we need to commit to addressing and resolving this matter, to have good procedures for assigning limits. And also 54% of procurement comes from single vendors. So we have similar numbers. So well, here we're usually talking about some unique decisions. It may range from 6 to 10%, but in 40% of cases, nobody takes part in the bidding. So things has been done right, but nobody participates. So the question is, if the average number of bids is 3, so how many bids do we have for the remaining 50% of the contracts? If there are a lot of contracts or auctions that nobody wants to take part in, it probably means that the specification, the documentation is not processed appropriately. So we still do not understand why there are no bidders to so many contracts. Why do vendors not take part in those biddings and competitions? Maybe vendors are afraid that they will not be paid for the contracts they win. Here we need transparency and traceability. There are ways to protect vendors, and we should look for those ways and apply them. Also, acceptance procedures. We should control the way customers accept goods and services provided by vendors. There is an understanding that a lot of vendors do not want to deal with public procurement because it's because then they become subject to a lot of audits and inspections from all kinds of agencies. If this is true, low competition has to do not with Federal Law 44, but with something else. Let us understand what we can do as part of Federal Law 44 and what we cannot. Maybe there are other areas that need improvement apart from Law 44. So under Law 44, competition is twice as high, which is good. Then I believe we should further work to streamline and standardize the procedures and processes. So there might be multiple reasons for companies not to participate in public procurement. And also, I would probably disagree when you say that, well, Rosneft cannot be compared with the ministry. It's a business structure. They have a good financial performance, and they are certainly interested to increase the bottom line and to cut the costs, to apply competitive procedures. If they don't do this, it's their internal matter, and it does not have to do with the legislature. They say we are a business and we compete with other international businesses, but they do not need to follow the rules that we have. Well, streamlining and standardization is necessary in any case. So these are the major issues that we encounter. So the goal is to identify issues. And once we identify them, we approach them from the legislative side. Termination of contracts. This is also something that keeps the vendors averted from public procurement. About 10% of all government contracts are terminated bilaterally. Is it normal or is it not? Or there might be other reasons for termination. Maybe the parties are afraid of unilateral termination. So about 8 to 10 contracts are terminated early, annually, which is not much. Is it a threat to vendors? It is yet to be understood. But again, what we see is that vendors are afraid to be involved in public procurement and to sign up for government contracts. They are afraid even to approach it. So this fall, we would like to adopt 2 laws. Then in 2020, we should make all electronic tools operable. Starting next year, we will have 1 document instead of 4. As far as the procurement schedule is concerned, it is good both for the customers and for the vendors. It will contain major information about procurement contracts. Further, we should think about other revisions to improve the pre-procurement procedures. Why did we decide to move from Law 94 to Law 44? Because Law 94 did not deal with the pre-procurement procedures. It only took care of the procurement itself, which was not sufficient.
Самое важное.
Thank you, Alexei. The most important point I see is that the ministry is so open discussion that there's need for feedback. Ksanahin, you and colleagues arrange a forum which has become the most important platform for discussion of the development of the procurement system. I was taking note, and I think points that were raised here should become part of the agenda of the forum that you're staging. Yes, we have taken that into account. And now, colleagues, I want to give the floor to our experts. Very briefly, 2 minutes. Let's start with Ms. Kamenskaya, Union of Businessmen and Entrepreneurs. Let me start by saying that any public contract should guarantee stability of entrepreneurial activity. Alexei Mikhailovich made a brilliant statement very briefly, showing that today public procurement does not attain this goal. Although we're moving in that direction, we support all the initiatives that were mentioned, e-shop, improvement in the procurement system. But there's one initiative I want to dwell on further. Professional plaintiffs, fines for those that file unjustified complaints. This is indeed a problem we need to deal with, but the system of public procurement should be based on the principle of commensurability. And we shouldn't be too harsh, because right now we see that this initiative would limit access to tenders, because it will not only deal with the problem of professional plaintiffs, but also it can undermine opportunities and create barriers for bona fide suppliers. transaction costs that are there when you enter into a public contract should not be higher than those when you do a B2B contract. Right now, when additional criteria will be introduced, this will raise costs. And we think that this will make bona fide contractors more cautious, and it will result in a higher number of problems, because right now the only tool they have is to file this complaint. And charging this fee will only be fair, when I mention it specifically, when one criteria is met. When a federal anti-monopoly service case law would be sufficient to give a market participant an idea of how his complaint would be dealt with. So if he is able to analyze the market and see that his good prospect, then he will file a complaint. But if he sees it's unjustified, he will not. So you generally support the initiative, but it should be done differently. Exactly. If we look at the Court of Arbitrage, they've also introduced charges, but the absolute threshold is 10,000 rubles, because a large amount would be too high for an SME. Exactly, especially if you have to complain more than once. Thank you, Tatiana Alexeyevna. Sergei Gabastra from the Business Russia Association. Thank you, colleagues. Apropos about the complaints, since we started talking about arbitration court, we need to be able to charge all expenses related to a complaint in case a complaint is considered to be unjustified. The topic you raised is very interesting. Why is that? We have fewer and fewer high-quality participants of public procurement. I'll give you an example. I run a few businesses, one in Crimea, and it's a construction company, a developer. So we just built an embankment in Yalta. There are private investors that sponsored it. And immediately I was approached by people from the Crimea saying, we have 3.5 billion for an embankment in this city, 1.5 billion for an embankment in that city, because we have no companies that would be able to perform a contract. So I spoke to 3 of my partner construction companies and said, no, we're never going to deal with public procurement any longer, because we know all in all about 5 people that are either in jail or fled from justice because they participated in the public contract. They find themselves in a similar situation as those people you referred to in Sakhalin. So they said, no, we're not dealing with Federal Law 44. We can build a building and then sell it to you, but we're not going to deal with Law 44. So no way. So this is a trend that exists today. There are very many good bona fide businessmen that have no connections in the prosecutor's office, in FSB, and the Ministry of Interior. No one to protect them. So no, they're not dealing with Federal Law 44. People that agree to work under 44, they all have connections with law enforcement agencies. Look, I like this forum because we can be blunt, we can tell the truth. With all due respect, I greatly appreciate the fact that the Ministry of Finance now is so transparent that we can tell the truth to each other, even at those public meetings. And a few more words about what hurts. If we want to reduce the number of unjustified refusals to pay, we have to spend more and more resources. We receive letters from public agencies that tell us, state-owned companies that tell us we will not pay you Because, for instance, in our budget, there is no relevant line of expenditures. So we're going to have to forward it to another agency, and if they agree, if they consent, they will probably pay us. And others just refuse to pay. But let us give us a tool, give us an instrument to punish them. You can go to the prosecutors general. Oh, come on, please. You must be kidding me. Prosecutors general, really? Well, we just helped someone from Irkutsk. This person was was not paid for 2 months. But look, we're dealing about hundreds of such cases, thousands of such cases, refusals to pay. Do you really want me to go to prosecutors general every time? There are simpler solutions. You can deal with it systemically. And either you do so, it can be done differently. For instance, there can be down payment of 10,000, and if once that's exhausted, something else should happen. But I mean, wait. I'm not finished yet. We spoke about various types of regulations that contradict one another. It's very relevant for implant substitution, and you don't know which one to apply. So it's up to an agency that does procurement, and it can apply one norm or another arbitrarily. See, there are different norms. They are competing. And one more point, yet another point I want to make. When we talk about property, we keep saying that we need more SMEs engagement with the state. For instance, there are land tenders or tenders to sell different assets, but there's no relevant financial model. And the beginning of September, some decision was taken, but I'm not quite sure what happens with assets that were confiscated, with land tenders. This has not been regulated. This isn't regulated. And then you need to deal with GOFRU procurement. We're ready, but it should be up to the Ministry of Economic Development. And since we're here to tell the truth to one another, I have a suggestion. I think we need to suggest it to our government to mandate all officials that apply the two federal laws to do internships, both sides, the companies that do procurements and the companies that participate in tenders. So very often people are just not qualified enough. Because once they learn, very many of them lose their jobs because they're fined for violations. So I suggest a mandatory internship for all people that are in charge of procurement. So once they've done so, and you should do this internship as well. We can wait for a month, but you will understand the situation so much better. Okay, very briefly. Indeed, I'll give you an example. In Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, when a businessman supplied a playground equipment, he was not paid, and then he started complaining, and now he's facing charges, suspected of fraud. And we have to deal with it. By the way, the mayor of Sakhalin that did procurement now fleeing justice. But we need to learn from those cases. Let me comment on confiscated assets, land and public assets. We analyzed the situation and we submitted our proposals to government. That was 2 years back, by the way. Because I understand how problematic it is, we did receive a lot of such complaints, and we forwarded it to special representative of the president. So since we collect all data, we forwarded it to the prosecutors general. They looked into it and did respond. But what I'm trying to say is that we suggested to introduce new functionality to the unified procurement system. We spoke to colleagues from the Treasury. So we are prepared to introduce those new types of procurement. We were suggesting to unify them, to introduce procedures for procurement, for electronic procurement. Well, we've been talking about it for 10 years, and 10 years back, we could clearly see that we need to introduce these unified, simple procedures at one platform with a single system of accreditation. And it's nothing to argue about. It's so simple. It just has to be done. And just one point I want to make about Sakhalin. You're right. Businessmen are afraid. If I were in private business, I would never deal with public procurement. Knowing exists in legislation, no, it's much too rough. I wouldn't risk. And it has to be changed. But the problem is very often there are, private individual arrangements that kill competition. But you never know whether there was collusion or not. You're right. But if we look at how things stand right now, indeed the situation is very difficult. We need to streamline, facilitate, improve, and we've already made the first step in this direction. In spring, we'll continue moving in that direction, but we shouldn't act randomly or hastily. That's very briefly what I wanted to say. Indeed, we need to allow business community to complain or appeal about this unilateral termination of contracts, because very many avoid public procurement. It takes a lot of courage to engage in public procurement because you risk a lot. You risk that if a contract is terminated, you will lose your collateral, then you will spend 18 months in court trying to recover your costs, and you may even land in jail for nothing. Okay, colleagues, let's move on. And I just want to add that you can land in jail for an offense committed under Law 159, which has become very widespread. Now, our next speaker from the Russian bidding house that was established in 2009. Very briefly, the point I want to make is that a bylaw on unified tender has been under discussion for many years. We all agree that this is something that needs to be done. But had you brought on board business community, you would have been able to deal with it much faster, because this has already been tabled 8 times with little success. But unless you engage business community, you will not achieve results. There's need for discussion. There's need for expert revision of this article, peer review of this law, because it's already been through 8 circles. 8 attempts have been made, little avail. Sergei spoke a lot, but I also want to add to payment for unjustified complaints, which I think is good because there are many people that just professionally complain, and this will be a good instrument to counter them. I think it would be a step in the right direction. As regards reduction number of procurement, this is also a very positive trend, and we thank the Ministry of Finance, regulator, for the work they've been doing in this direction. As regards construction, Decree 99, I have a question. We as operators of the platform, how can we control construction companies? We are technically unable to do monitoring. So please take into account that it all has to be introduced in the single registry, in the electronic system. How can we check if it's a bona fide construction? And those special accounts, that also is important, and it has been said a few times that something has to be done. And if it's an account used for public procurement, banks cannot use it for a different purpose. They cannot use it otherwise. And that creates additional difficulties. And banks, the fact that banks are not a part of the contractual system, nor are we, by the way, we're also somewhere on the side. Everyone's part of the system, but not us. And the electronic platforms are treated as outsiders, which is weird. And then again, what we do is business, so we cannot work free of charge. And we should be allowed to charge money without going to court. If we're talking about minor amounts, such as 5,000 or 10,000, why go to court? A platform, no platform can operate free of charge. We're not sponsored from budget. We are privately owned enterprise, so we need to be able to make money. So please let us.
Well, for 2 years, we've walked a very difficult path, and we haven't been connected to the independent registration body. So hopefully this independent registration body will be reliable and will be here for long. We do not want to see it changed every couple of years. Andrei, thank you. Well, Voskhod will not have to pay for it, and the Russian Federation Treasury will not either. General Director of Joint Stock Company Tektorg. Please, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. It is hard to speak after such two outstanding speakers. So the first thing I would like to say is about the reasons of low competition. I've been traveling in the regions for a couple of years, meeting with the business community. There are a lot of issues with cross-regional procurement. So regions operate within their own boundaries, and they do not want to go beyond their borders. For instance, a lady comes to me and says, so I receive invitations to take part in public procurement. Why don't you go to Tyumen region to sell medical devices there? And she says she doesn't want to. Why doesn't she go to Moscow? Well, in Moscow there is good competition, but in the regions the situation is very different. Number two, in addition to what Mikhail Yakovlevich said, in the autumn package, would it be possible to look at the limitations of Law 44? For instance, very tough timelines for contract closure. It is hard to meet those timelines. For instance, there was a contract to supply furniture before the 1st of September. It was the vacation season, but a lot of people are on vacation. People who have the right of signature to sign contracts are unable to sign before September the 1st. So that means the furniture delivery will not be before September the 1st. And that means violation of procurement procedures. And number three, I would like to Well, I anticipate amendments in Law 94 as far as small procurements are concerned. We would like this market to be open to electronic bidding. Yes, we've been dealing with the Law 223 and Federal Law 44. We have catalogs and thousands of contracts are signed during a month. But one last thing, most platforms are accredited in the federal tax system. We would like to be part of the digitalized procurement system, to be able to provide digital documents to this uniform electronic system. So we would like to be able to continue. And Vladimir Gerasimov will be the last to speak. He's Executive Director of Interfax Information Agency. So it's great to see new trends in procurement, because the previous trend that exacerbated details and complexity, which almost killed competition. We want to see more companies, more vendors in the system. So my observation is that customers in the procurement system are unable to work with the market, to see prices. What we saw with the procurement of pharmaceutical products, we could see that a lot of auctions did not take place because there was lack of understanding of terms and conditions and prices. Now that we simplify this procurement system, I believe it is important to have this opportunity stipulated in Article 38 of Federal Law 44, to be able to see potential contracts, potential supply. It already takes. It is already the case in Moscow, when customers are able to see, to have the choice, to have a good choice of vendors. And we would like this practice to spread into regions, because it will strongly improve the procurement system, both for customers and for vendors. Thank you. So let me thank all of you for participation, and specifically Ilya Dmitrov, because he gave his name to his time to the other speakers. So I wish you a productive forum.